Frost clung to the carbon fiber stock. Lynn's cheekbone kissed the comb, skin numbed, breath metered through the nose so the scope wouldn't fog. The valley below looked painted on. Hard white ridgelines, a thread of road, a single figure pinning himself to a boulder, as if stone could absorb intent. Raven 2? Range? The spotter's whisper barely moved the air. A green readout winked. 2,980. Almost 3 kilometers. The number pressed on her like a hand to the sternum. Wind hissed against the rock lip. Not a breeze. Layers. Left to right at the saddle, right to left in the cut. Mirage swam, slow as breath. Raven 2, PID confirmed. No civilians adjacent. ROE green if you have it. The radio voice was sandpaper. Her gloved thumb found the safety. The trigger wall felt like a door frame before a burning room. She rolled her shoulder, settled bone on bone, let the world become reticle and pulse. Wind 5 to 7, switching, the spotter said. Hold call sign, Boreal. Send when ready. They had laughed at the number in the briefing tent. They had laughed when she chalked the firing solution on the whiteboard and didn't add a smile. Lynn exhaled, let the last ribbon of air slide out. The valley stilled. Send it, the spotter breathed. She pressed. The rifle broke like a twig in winter. The earth kept its secrets. 72 hours earlier, FOB Guardian canvas snapped in the wind like a flag biting down on itself. Diesel heaters coughed a sour warmth into the briefing tent, clashing with the cold that crept up from the metal floor. 4 rows of folding chairs. 2 maps taped end to end. A whiteboard with a fat black marker clipped to its lip. Lynn capped the marker between finger and thumb, like a casing she hadn't yet chambered. On the board she wrote 2,1080 and circled it once. The circle looked too neat. It needed the mess of air. Raven Overwatch, Karak Plateau, the CO said. Captain Briscoe's voice had the weight of habit. Humanitarian corridor opens at 1100 Z. Threat actor likely to queue from elevated ground. 2,980, someone in the back said. A low chuckle, then a cough to cover it. Metal chair feet squeaked. She didn't turn. The number could carry that heat. She didn't need to. On the adjacent grid, she sketched the ridge profile, a saddle, a canyon that poured wind like water from a cracked pitcher. She drew 3 arrows, left to right across the saddle, right to left in the cut, a slack wash over the basin. The lane exists, Lynn said. Her voice was flat steel. Short window, stability over breadth. We anchor to the saddle, we don't chase the wash. Briscoe nodded once. ROE remains standard for the corridor. PID required. No civilians within CDE. If it's not clean, it's nothing. Copy? Copy. Voices answered, layered, some convinced, some humoring. Lynn wrote PIDX2 and underlined. Chalk. Dust felt like winter on her skin. After the brief, the tent emptied in a rustle of gear and the small theater of jokes soldiers make to pad distance from the thing they're walking toward. The spotter, Torres, lingered. He was broad through the shoulders and moved like a man who had carried too much and kept some of it. They're going to keep poking at that number, he said, low. They can poke, Lynn said. She wiped the board slowly, letting the dry squeal erase certainty back to blankness. We'll carry. Outside, the fob smelled of hot metal and wet rope. Helicopter rotors beat a slow drum beyond the barriers. Pallets of bottled water wrapped in cloudy plastic winked in the weak sun. The plateau stood up beyond the wire, very near and impossibly far. In the makeshift armory, she laid out the rifle the way some people lay out cutlery. Everything with a home and a reason. She checked the lugs, the torque on the rings, the battery icon in the optic, then turned it off to keep the cold from chewing it early. She counted rounds by touch more than sight, fingertips reading brass for burrs. Torres handled the rangefinder and the kestrel, his motions a quiet language. "You ever take a shot that far?" Torres asked. He wasn't testing her. He was placing a stone so the crossing had a line. "No." She set the bolt gently into battery and drew it back to safe, listening for grit. "I've taken shots that were long enough to tell the truth." He grinned without showing teeth. "Truth being? That paper is a rumor." She slid the rifle into the drag bag. "The Earth is a witness." They moved to the zero range that wasn't a range so much as a strip of disused runway facing a low slope with a bank of sandbags built by bored hands. Lynn didn't chase tiny groups. She confirmed consistency at a sensible distance, wrote a note on a small card, then put the card away as if it were a photo of someone she didn't want to explain. Wind cut across the concrete. The sky was a bruised bowl. When they finished, her fingers ached with a dull, useful pain. She felt awake in the way cold can make a person honest. En route to the supply Connex, two shooters from another team leaned on a stack of cases, faces open with amusement that wasn't cruel, but wasn't kind. "Hey, Raven," one called, tapping the white plastic of a coffee lid. "You going to ping God from that ridge? Save us the paperwork?" Torres shifted, a knee flex barely visible. Lynn caught it with a look. He went still. She walked closer until the space shrank to truth. "I'm going to do my job," she said. "You should do yours." The man with the coffee opened his hands as if to show he was unarmed. "Just asking how it feels to write a fairy tale on a whiteboard." "Like carrying water," Lynn said. "Heavy, necessary, and no one remembers who brought it." She stepped past. Torres followed, his amusement now quiet too. Later, in the tent where people made sleep look like a negotiation, Lynn lay on her back and counted breaths. 4 in, 6 out. The cot webbing hummed under her shoulder blades. She did not replay the joke. She replayed the ridge in her mind until the lines of it became as familiar as the hinge of her thumb. At some point, the heater clicked off and the cold came in like a tide over stone. Morning tasted like diesel and bad coffee. They kitted up without drama. Briscoe stepped into the tent long enough to mark their route with a knuckle on the map. Then he looked at her too long. "You good, Staff Sergeant?" She holstered her silence. "Good, sir." He nodded, something like relief passing over his face and gone. "Convoy roll at 1100 Z. Your window's smaller than we like. Rosea, PID, no collateral, no signature. Bring it back dark." "Wilco." The walk-in began in half-light. The world held its breath between day and weather. Snow crust broke under crampons with a sound like thin glass giving up. Torres took rear for the first ascent, then traded at the saddle. They moved in the rhythm of old partners. Check, step, check. Cloud shadow slid like a lid over the basin. Somewhere a dog barked, small and defiant, then stopped. On the final pitch, Lynn felt the slope test her. Calves shook, thighs burned, lungs took in cold that shaved the throat smooth. She didn't argue. She kept the breath count. Let pain be a metronome. At the lip, they crawled the last meters, bellies to stone, and the world beneath them opened. The lane existed. Narrow. Honest. The kind of honesty that didn't care if you believed in it. They built the OP with hands that knew how to be quiet. Snow blocks, scrim, patient angles. Torres set the antenna, then wiped ice from the contacts with a cloth like he was polishing a relic. Lynn stretched, rolled shoulders, let the sling settle. Radio check came in clean, then ragged, then clean again. The plateau liked to remind people who was in charge. "Raven 2, this is Guardian," the net said. "Confirm eyes on corridor approach." Lynn glassed the basin. Heat mirage barely woke in the low sun. "Guardian, Raven 2. Visual on approach. No movement. Wind layers present. Mapping. Copy. ISR will be late by 10. Adjust." Wilco. She watched the saddle where the wind wrote its shifting script. She read the letters without pretending they were numbers. Torres logged, his pencil a steady scratch against the board. The world narrowed to what mattered and widened to the cost. She let it. The number on the board wasn't bravado. It was a promise written to herself in cold and steel. The wind wrote 3 different stories on the valley, and none of them agreed. Through the glass, mirage wavered like breath on hot asphalt, except everything here was cold enough to shave thought to the bone. Lynn slid the focus ring until the boil of air steadied into a readable script. The saddle moved left to right, slow, patient. The cut below it pushed right to left, meaner, a little drunk. Over the basin, the air barely drifted as if bored. Torres ticked pencil on slate. Saddle L to R, 1.2 to 1.6 mils. Cut R to L up to 2. Basin near 0. Switching intervals 5 to 8 minutes. She nodded and said nothing. The scope shadow curled at the edge of her vision. She adjusted cheek weld by a hair until the vignetting disappeared. The rifle felt less like a machine and more like a door frame she could lean against without apology. The Kestrel's fan buzzed and died. Torres smacked the casing with a knuckle. It stuttered back to life. Drew another thin breath of air. Coughed up numbers that disappeared as soon as they settled. On the antenna, rime ice formed a white scab that he scraped away with the edge of a laminated card. The world arranged itself into distances and the memory of distances. She ran the reticle across the ridgeline and tried to listen with her eyes. Mirage in the saddle slid like a river seen from high up. The cut pretended to be a friend, then bared a different set of teeth. The basin shrugged. "Raven 2, this is Guardian. ISR delay now +15. Say again +15. The radio said, voice chewing on static. Convoy roll unchanged. Lynn clicked to transmit. "Guardian, Raven 2. Copy +15. Mapping winds. Will anchor to saddle lane unless advised. Copy." She let the handset fall back into the dark of the hide. Snow blocks on either side gave off a faint, wet wool smell, where their edges had begun to soften, then freeze again. Her fingertips had turned into blunt tools. Sensation came back in slow pins when she flexed them. She didn't rub warmth. She saved it. "Anchor to the saddle?" Torres asked, eyes still on the slate. "It's the only one that keeps a promise," she said. He grunted. Agreement, skepticism, something that could be either and still be useful. Through glass, the far saddle cleaned up. A shadow peeled off a rock lip and lay down again. Nothing. Not yet. She scanned left, then right, checked for anything that behaved like a person trying not to. The reticle floated, always a breath from where it needed to be. She eased the bipod cant. It bit into ice with a sound like a slow zipper. The numbers on her dope card were only ever a rumor until the Earth co-signed. She knew that. Still, she penciled a hold that favored the saddle's cruelty rather than the cut's whim. She could carry a miss to the right with a conscience. A miss into the convoy's path would not be something she could put down. "Wind is stepping up," Torres murmured. The slate scratched. Saddles at 1.8 now. Cuts angry, 2.4, gusting. RO, Lynn said. Defer if wind unknown. Saying it out loud made it feel heavier, truer. RO wasn't a leash. It was a spine. Torres didn't look up. Copy ROE. A gasp of static, then a new voice. Guardian to Raven Net. Report any movement along grid Bravo 4 to Charlie 1. Possible pattern of life anomaly earlier. The voice came like a far-off hammer striking water. Impact without clarity. Raven 2 copies, Torres transmitted. He glanced at her. POL anomaly. She moved the reticle across the grid squares. Slow, methodical, like turning pages with gloves on. A goat picked its way between boulders. A rectangle of tarp shook, then stilled. A man-shaped nothing became a bush again. Her heartbeat made a small throb in her teeth and then backed off. The wind switched. It didn't announce itself so much as turn the room you were in without moving a wall. Mirage in the saddle paused, reversed, then apologized, and went back to left to right at a gentler pace. She adjusted the hold, wrote it down. Drew a line through the previous note, not because it had been wrong, but because the truth had moved. How small are you making the window? Torres asked. As small as it wants to be. He huffed a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. We can't live in here. We only need to visit, she said. He logged that too, though not on the slate. They watched the lane until time lost its edges. The sky sank a shade. The cold bored in under her plate carrier, then gave up at the heat it found there. She rolled her shoulder, let it creak, then settled back into the bone-on-bone feeling she trusted. Memory tried the door. In training, the wind had lied like this, and she had believed the second truth because it was easier to read. The shot had broken clean. The steel had rung distant and proud, and then a range officer had held up a tablet that showed just enough trace to prove she'd gotten lucky. Paper's a rumor, the instructor had told them later. Some had laughed. She hadn't. Luck had the aftertaste of a wrong name called too far away to fix. Battery, Torres said, tapping the optics cap. We're good. She nodded, eyes still in glass. The saddle's mirage steadied again. A thread of road cut the basin, pale against darker snow. No vehicles yet. No dust. Too cold for dust, anyway. She read the cut again. Right to left, sharp at the edges, slacker in the middle, a hiss through a broken tooth. Make the call, Torres said quietly. She set the pencil's point against the card and wrote, Anchor saddle, hold, 1.8 LR, Elev, per dope plus temp. She underlined anchor twice. The second line wasn't for the rifle. It was for the voice that would try later to widen the window when nerves started renegotiating terms. Anchor confirmed, she said. Copy. Torres closed the slate. It sounded like a book being finished. Silence moved in. Not absence. A presence that pressed on the sides of the hide. Lynn listened to her breath for any raggedness and smoothed it with the old metronome count. In 4, out 6, in 4, out 6. She held after the exhale, felt the small gravity of stillness, then let breath come back of its own mind. Raven 2 ISR inbound in 10, the radio cracked. Recommend focus on saddle and cut seam. We're already there, Torres transmitted. A blot of movement teased the far lip. Lynn's focus tightened to a thread. The figure belonged to the ridge the way a barnacle belongs to a rock until it doesn't. A shoulder shifted, binoculars flashed dull, a hood turned into a head. Possible, Torres whispered. Stand by, need Paul. The figure sank again, patient or spooked. Wind leaned harder into the cut, tried to pull the reticle across the basin. She rode the lean, didn't chase it, let the rifle be heavy where it wanted to be heavy. "R.O.E. Wind unknown, we defer," she murmured, almost to herself. The words went somewhere she could reach for them when the noise rose. "Copy," Torres said. The slate opened again. Pencil scratched. The wind settled. Lynn took the small permission and annotated a tighter hold. 1.6 LRs. The numbers were anchors, but the feel mattered more. The way the mirage bent around rock like fabric pulled by a hand you couldn't see. "ISR on station," the net said. "Orbiting. Clean corridor for now." Torres flicked to a secondary channel, listened, nodded. "ISR confirms no civilian foot traffic near the saddle seam. Convoy T-90. 90 minutes could be an hour or a year depending on what the wind wanted from them." Lynn eased the sling a notch and felt blood return to a sleeping patch of skin at her forearm. Pain like pins in wet cloth. She filed it under Chapikukinin later. A minor gust grabbed the antenna and rattled it. Torres steadied the mast with a palm, breath fogging the cold plastic. "I'll put a sock over that." "Do it," she said, still in the glass. When he was done, the hide seemed to breathe easier. She glanced once at him, thumbs flexing, a thin band of white where the glove had rubbed skin raw, and then returned to the only thing that was true right now, the way the air walked across the mountain. She chose the window then, not when the target would appear, but now, because decisions made in quiet held better. Saddle only. If the figure popped in the cut, they would hold. If he tried to use the basin as a screen, they would let him pass unless the earth itself seconded their call. It wasn't bravery. It was fidelity to the part of the job that didn't make stories people told intense. "Anchor final," she said. "Anchor final," Torres echoed. They sat in that choice. The wind argued. The hide listened. Nothing broke. Far below, a point of light winked where no point of light should be. Not a glint. Too steady. Lynn tracked. The figure reformed from the ridge, a lens held low like a communion cup, scanning for a convoy that hadn't yet set itself in motion. Torres breathed. "Poel building." Lynn wrote a single word under. "Anchor. Wait." The rock she picked for the test looked like a shoulder pressed into the sky. A harmless thing. If a round kissed it, no one bled and no convoy died. That was the seduction. Through the scope, the ridge's skin trembled with mirage. The tremble had a tempo now, long, slow strokes with brief stutters where the cut knifed through. She dialed elevation, then backed off one click and wrote the number down instead of trusting the itch to set it. A pencil scratch in the cold sounded like a twig breaking somewhere no one should be. "That's your rock?" Torres asked, binoculars steady, elbows planted in the hardpack like stakes. "It would tell the truth," she said. She didn't move the rifle. "And it would tell on us." He let the silence stand. The Kestrel's impeller spun, paused, spun again, enough to give them the shape of the air without pretending to be gospel. On the radio, Guardian's net muttered to itself. Logistics, timing, a weather fragment. ISR's orbit droned faint at the edge of audibility. Lynn slid her finger forward until it found the first pressure. Not weight, contact. The pad settled. The mind asked for proof. Somewhere under the hide, meltwater ticked in a slow, indifferent metronome. She took out the click of her breath, the twitches at the edge of her cheek, and let the reticle float where it would live if the world stayed honest for a heart's half-beat. "Wind stable in the saddle," Torres whispered. 1.6 to 1.8. Cut is still mean. Basin is napping. She saw it too. The saddle's mirage leaned, then held, like a cord that finally resolved. The rock should have been a formality, a courtesy you paid to a calculation so it would stop asking for attention. She could send the round, catch the trace, confirm the drop, and file the feeling of certainty where it calmed the animal in the chest that hated maybes. A gust shouldered the hide. Snow grit whispered against the scrim. The bipod feet creaked in their bite. Off somewhere, a flat piece of ice slid and sounded like a distant door closing. Signature risk, Torres said. Not a warning, a balance point. She took slack to the wall. The trigger was glass under glove. Nothing, then everything. The rifle remembered her weight, how she stacked bones to keep muscle out of the decision. The reticle settled on the rock shoulder that had never mattered to anyone until this second, and wouldn't again if she left it alone. A memory put its head up. Range steel ringing in clear air, the clean pride of it. And a tablet later that showed a trace just wrong enough to turn pride into a question. Paper had clapped. The earth had raised an eyebrow. ROE, she said. The word hung visible for a breath in the cold. No unnecessary fires, that risk detection. Copy, Torres echoed, quiet as thought. She eased off the wall. Not a flinch, not indecision, an unmaking. Tension flowed back into the joint of her trigger finger, down the tendon, out through the wrist she'd learned to keep stacked straight. The rifle became a doorframe again, something to lean on without opening. The urge didn't leave. It moved over and sat where she could keep an eye on it. Reindex holds to the saddle, she said. We'll let the rock keep its secrets. Torres nodded. The slate opened. Pencil. Saddle 1.6, 1.8 LR. Cut 2.2, 2.4 RL. Gusting. He drew a small box beside test, abort, and shaded it in with neat, stubborn lines. They reread the air, slower, like you check each step on a ladder that's older than you. The Mirage's lean over the saddle pulsed with a rhythm her breathing could share. She let her exhale end and rested in the thin stillness before the body insisted on another breath. The reticle didn't jump. It drifted the way a man drifts when he pretends not to be watched. Raven 2, this is Guardian, the radio cracked. ISR confirms prior anomaly at grid. Charlie 1-5 is now cold. Convoy T-80. Report any change. Raven 2 copies, Torres said. No change. Anchored to saddle. Lynn found the figure from earlier. There and not there, a habit of the landscape. The shape moved with the ridge's grammar. Rise, settle, glance that pretended to be a shadow. A lens flashed once, then hid the way an eye hides when it realizes it isn't alone. She wrote a single word under Patritisortsum. Angchor. Favor, safe. It looked like safety. It tasted like responsibility. The wind stepped up, then backed off. The radio coughed. Batteries ticked colder. Time stretched. Talk me through your why, Torres said. He wasn't challenging. He was making a space where the decision could root. If we throw around at the rock, she said, we confirm numbers we already know and trade stealth for applause we can't use. Paper claps, he said, a ghost of a smile. The earth raises an eyebrow. He chuckled, brief, then went still again, eyes traveling the ridge with her. They watched the same nothing happen the same dozen ways until the nothing had edges and a slope. A thread of wind slid up from the basin and tried the saddle like a lockpick. She saw it in the way the Mirage bent near the lip, an extra wobble, a quiver against the steady lean. She dialed half a tenth, then erased the motion and wrote the hold instead. The card's edges had curled from breath and snow. She flattened it with the back of a glove and felt the cold seep through leather. Raven 2, confirm comms contingency is set, Guardian said. Reports of icing on forward elements. Contingency set, Torres replied. He flexed his fingers, then slid the spare handset deeper into the hide's pocket. Lynn checked her sling. The bipod can't. The tiny things that become enormous when the window narrows to a few honest seconds. The rifle told her where it wanted to sit. She listened. The earth told her how it liked to move. She made room. A hawk worked the thermals below them for a luxury minute, then thought better of the day and tucked away. The figure on the far ridge reassembled from rock again, lingered, then dissolved. Pattern of life, building itself grain by grain. Could still send one, Torres murmured, not as a push, like a weather report. Low risk, maybe. Low isn't none, she said, and none is what we owe the convoy. He let it go. The slate closed with that book-finished sound that made choices feel heavier than they were. Lynn settled cheek to stock, skin cold, scope shadow clean, the world reduced to reticle and wind and the small gravity of a decision already made. The test shot receded behind her like a road she'd chosen not to take. The hide felt darker, tighter, safer for it. She adjusted the card again, underlined. Wait. The pencil's line dug into the damp paper like a plow in hard ground. Below them, the corridor held its breath. Above them, the sky lowered one notch toward weather. Between those two breaths, she set hers. Let the number on the board be a promise instead of a dare, and held the job the way you hold something that isn't yours to drop. Anchor confirmed, she said. Anchor confirmed, Torres answered. They watched the rock become nothing again, which was the point all along. By noon, the light had the thin cruelty of glass. The basin glared back like a white plate left out too long. Lynn blinked against it once, then settled to the scope until glare became texture she could use. The saddle kept its slow, left-to-right lean, stubborn, and faintly generous. The cut still muttered in a contrary key. Convoy T-60, Guardian's net said, distant, as if spoken from behind a curtain of cold. Copy 6-0, Torres answered. His pencil tapped the slate twice without writing. A habit, a prayer. Lynn rolled her shoulder until it clicked quiet, and then let it find the stock again. The rifle's weight had become a known ache in the bones. A steady hand on the shoulder you don't shrug off, because it's the only thing keeping you honest. ISR's orbit is wide, Torres said, listening to the secondary feed that came in chopped and thin. They're painting the corridor, not the seam. The seam is where the truth leaks, she said. He gave a soft grunt that meant, you're right, and we're late. The Kestrel's impeller spun, caught, and spun again, numbers clattering like loose coins before settling into a useful jingle. Saddle 1.618 LR, cut 2.224 RL gusts. The basin lay undecided, a shrug you couldn't trust. Raven 2, this is Guardian. ISR tasking remains corridor-wide. Recommend you adapt to the product provided, came the voice on the net. Matter of fact, frugal with courtesy. Lynn keyed the handset. Guardian Raven 2, request ISR narrow to saddle seam Bravo 4 to Charlie 1. We need pattern of life confirmation for PID. A beat. Rotor thump far away, the sound landing like a delayed heartbeat. Raven 2, ISR is saturated. Corridor priorities remain. Advise why seam specific. She kept her voice flat. 2 wind lanes. Only one keeps a promise. Seam confirms the human from the rock. Without it, our PID is inference. ROE requires more than that. Static walked across the speaker, then sat down. Torres looked at her without turning his head, approval the size of a breath. "Stand by, Raven," the net said. Lynn let the handset go and returned to the glass. The figure from earlier had melted back into geology. A goat tried the slope, reconsidered, moved lower with the careful disdain of a creature that never had to justify itself to a radio. 55, Torres murmured. His pencil scratched TT50 vivant in the corner of the slate, then boxed it. The cold reached through her gloves to the slim bones of her hands. She flexed once, and the ache lit, a steady line from wrist to elbow. She filed it with the other acceptable pains, the ones that meant you were alive and paying attention. Breath in 4, out 6. The hide smelled of wet nylon and scraped ice. The small human stink of endurance filtered through snow. "Raven 2, Guardian," the net returned. "ISR will tighten to the seam for a short window. 10 minutes, then they're off task. You'll get it at T-35? Raven 2 copies. Seam at -35, Lynn said. "We'll be ready." Torres wrote, "Isar seam 10 minor T-35, in thick letters, then underlined it. "Unforgiving window," he said. "Forgiving is how mistakes hide," Lynn said. The words weren't for him. They were a hook to hang her focus on. She swept the ridge again. Mirage leaned obediently over the saddle. The cut still snapped, a sideways knife. She nudged the bipod a degree, felt the feet bite, then let the reticle settle. The world reduced to geometry and the parts of a person that survived geometry. The breath, the pulse, the quiet. A truck coughed to life somewhere down on the fob's edge. The sound carried up the mountain as an echo from another country. Lynn pictured the convoy. Boxy vehicles with their bright decals like good intentions taped to skin. Drivers who'd learned to sit small and think about families as a way of being brave without making noise. She let the picture go before it made the job something it couldn't be. "Raven 2, report status," Guardian prompted. "Anchor saddle," Torres replied. "Wind characterized, 1.6, 1.8 L to R. Cut unstable, basin variable, hide dark. Standing by ISR seam." "Copy, Raven." A sliver of movement teased the lip. No, lie of angle. The mountain had tricks, and the Mirage liked being a partner in small deceptions. Lynn didn't chase. She adjusted nothing and let patience do the moving. 45, Torres said, then softer. "You good?" "Good," she said. The word was a tool, not a feeling. It fit the hand. They ate half an energy bar in the kind of silence that has a job. Sugar went to the head, sat there, then moved on. Her tongue went dry. She let it. The slate's pencil point snapped. Torres sharpened it with a tiny knife, the sound like a hair being split. Static bloomed. "ISR on approach to seam orbit," the net said. "Window at -35. Clean corridor at present. Negative civilian foot traffic near seam." "Copy clean corridor," Torres said. Lynn rolled the ocular focus until the far lip came up hard and close, then backed it off a hair. Too sharp made the air's lies look honest. She breathed and found the center of the exhale, that thin plank where everything in the world stopped arguing and listened. "-36, Torres said. "Any change?" "Mirage steady over saddle," she said. "Hold 1.6, 11 per dope plus temp." "-35? ISR in orbit, pushing feed," Guardian announced. A tone in the net shifted. Background noise thinned, like someone had closed a door on a hallway. "Eyes on," Torres breathed. He wasn't looking at the ISR image. He was listening to it change the room. Through glass, The ridge gave up a shadow that wasn't a shadow. A hood rose, settled. The slope took on the posture of a person trying to be rock. Pattern of life reared its head. A repeat glance at the basin road, a lens tilt, a stillness that only living things manage when they want to steal stillness from the world. Possible HVT, Torres whispered. Standby pole. Lynn's holds lived now in muscle more than math. The card was there, the numbers were there, but the saddle's lean had become a physics her body spoke without translating. She eased the sling tension until the rifle floated, neutrally buoyant on bone. Raven, ISR confirms individual at seam, the net said. No adjacent civilian signatures. Window 9 minutes. 9 minutes could be forever if the person did nothing. It could be nothing if he did everything. ROE, Lynn said quiet. PID requires corroborated POL. We don't send on silhouette. Copy ROE, Torres answered. The figure's lens moved, seeking the road that hadn't yet delivered its human cargo. He shifted and revealed a sliver of shoulder under the outer layer, color that didn't belong to shepherds in this cold. He turned again, and the way he used his cover said, trained, in the grammar that professionals hear and others don't. POL building, Torres said. His pencil skated quick. Lens, shoulder flash, professional cover usage. 8 minutes, Guardian Sankum counted. Time thinned. The wind thickened. The saddle leaned a breath harder left to right. Lynn wrote 1:7 and underlined it once. Request ISR zoom 1 level on seam figure, she transmitted. Need confirmatory behavior. Raven, you have 5 minutes of zoom, came the reply. Then off task. Copy 5. She did the math without numbers. 5 minutes was 3 breaths long if you let panic count. The zoom made the figure less abstract and more human in the way pixels can still be a person. He rotated the lens, checked the road, checked the ridge to his left, repositioned with a small economy that spared muscle for something later. He settled, waited, then adjusted again. No curiosity, only duty. Pattern of life, underlined twice. PID building, Torres said. We're close. Not until we are, Lynn answered. The words were a shield against the clock. 3 minutes, the net said. The wind steadied like a decision. Lynn fixed the hold. 107 LR. She didn't dial it. She carried it in the reticle, in the way her shoulder and hand agreed to behave when bones stacked right. Raven 2, ISR zoom off in 2, Guardian warned. Window closing. She keyed once. Copy. We have what we need. Torres looked over, a question in the angle of his jaw. Seam confirmed, she said. POL sufficient for PID if criteria hold. We wait for clean alignment. He nodded, then wrote in block letters. PI'd ready, hold for clean. The zoom pulled back. The figure became a truth smaller than the ridge and just as heavy. The convoy rolled somewhere out of sight, wheels already promised to the road. The saddle's mirage held its lean like a rule that had finally remembered to be fair. Window granted, Torres said, almost to the mountain. We asked for clarity. We got it. Lynn breathed in the cold until it stopped being cold and became air again. The request she'd made, reroute, narrow, accept less time for more truth, had clipped the day into a sharper line. Quiet fortitude wasn't a feeling. It was the way her hands didn't shake when clarity cost them minutes they might need later. Anchor saddle, she said. Hold 1.7. We wait. Copy anchor, Torres said. The slate closed with that finished book sound. Below them, the corridor began to move. The safer perch had manners. It let them breathe, left a shadowed chute for egress, and forgave small mistakes with stone to hide behind. But at 2,180 meters, the saddle narrowed to a keyhole, and from the safe perch, the keyhole was an angle pretending to be a door. Lynn studied the second option with glass that showed every kindness as a trap. 11 meters west, up a lip of wind-scoured rock, a notch opened the saddle into a clean lane the length of a truth you can't dodge. The notch had no cover at their backs, only sky, and the fall line off its left side slid into a gully that would take a man the fast way down if his crampon chose a wrong word. Exfil from there meant backing out the way they came, slow and exposed, until night decided to help. Pros and cons, Torres said, low, slate ready. Pros, Lynn said. Unobstructed lane on the saddle, stable Mirage red, bipod feet bite into stone, braced bone on bone, no muscle. She let silence weigh the rest. Cons, cornice to left. Backdrop is sky, silhouette risk if we stand. No immediate defilade. Exfil slow. Temperature dropping, Torres added, watching the kestrel make its small weather prayer. Ice loading increases on the cornice when wind shifts. The safer perch sat behind them like a polite suggestion. The notch waited the way cliffs wait. Patient, certain, indifferent to human arithmetic. Raven 2, status, Guardian's net nudged, calm as a metronome. Anchor saddle, Torres replied. Evaluating final perch. ISR seam orbit complete. PID elements retained. Lynn laid the rifle flat and looked with naked eyes. The way you do when you want the mountain to stop answering in numbers and start answering like itself. The notch gave them truth. The safe perch gave them a compromise that would come due at the exact second the convoy needed them not to owe anything. She pictured the convoy again and made herself stop before the picture turned into faces. The work needed geometry, not ghosts. Pick one, Torres said. Not a push, an invitation to close a door. The notch, she said. They moved as if the air could hear a zipper, one at a time. Torres first with the antenna collapsed and tucked, his weight low and certain, testing each crampon tooth like a phrase you don't want to mispronounce. Lynn followed with the rifle in the drag bag, sling short and tight so the weight hugged the spine. Their gloves rasped fabric and ice and rough stone in a litany that ended at the lip. From the notch, the world tilted. The saddle's mirage leaned left to right in a steady pour. The cut still argued in the corner of her eye, but lacked jurisdiction here. The basin's shrug didn't matter. The lane existed with the kind of existence that makes paperwork feel like a rumor. Lynn lay in, lengthwise, and let the rifle settle as if it had been left there by someone who'd built it into the rock and then melted out of the scene. Scope shadow disappeared with a millimeter correction at her cheek. Bipod legs found tiny cups in the stone, imperfections worn by nothing she cared to name, and locked. Silhouette control, she said. Torres nodded and dragged a strip of scrim over the sky-side lip, breaking their outline into nothing useful. He kept the antenna low and threaded its lead under a rock seam so the wind wouldn't play it like a flag. Test comms, he murmured. She keyed once. Raven 2, in final. Hide remains dark. Copy, Raven, the net said. See convoy T-20. ISR returning corridor wide. Report any change. Torres scribbled Huppertsikint T-20 and drew a tight box around it. Lynn ran the reticle across the saddle seam. The figure from earlier was stone again. Pattern of life had muscle memory, though, and people keep their habits under stress. He'd be back. She adjusted elevation by feel but didn't touch the dial. She wrote the correction on the card and let the weight of numbers live in graphite, not glass. Ice creaked somewhere in the gully. The cornice above sighed like a held breath reconsidered. Torres moved his weight an inch away from it and stayed there, hands open against the rock, balance quiet. "You tell me when this becomes a bad idea," he said. "It's a bad idea," she said. "It's the right one." He smiled with only the corner of his mouth, then let it go. The kestrel spun, faded, spun. "Saddle 17, he said. "Hold steady. Cut's irrelevant from here." She wrote, "Hold 1.7 LR." in a block that took the exact space of doubt and left no room for it. The pencil's point broke. She sharpened it with that small knife, the sound clean and mean in the cold. "RO, maintain concealment post-shot," she said, half to make the words stick in the hide. "No re-engage without re-PID, no movement for 2 minutes unless compromised." "Copy," Torres said. 2-minute statue after break. They adjusted the hide to be smaller than their fear. Drag bag angled to kill glare. Scope lens hood cinched. Brass catcher set without noise. A spare battery wedged where a cold battery would want company in the worst minute. She considered the safe perch again, only long enough to make the decision twice. Then she let the thought go and put her cheek back to the stock. "Raven 2, friendly element traversing lower basin far east," Guardian said. "No conflict with your lane. Convoy T-15. "Copy," Torres said. The figure reassembled at the seam as if called by the clock. He rose in 2 motions and settled in 1, lens low, posture quiet with intention. He checked left, then the basin, then the road. The way his elbows found stone said he had done this often enough to be bored by it, and smart enough not to be. Pixel person or not, he was suddenly human enough that the cold found a way under Lynn's armor in a stripe that felt like truth. "Poel confirms trained observer," Torres whispered. "We have what we need." She slid breath out until the world lost its argument and agreed, for one fragile beat, to be still. The hold lived in shoulder and hand, a tiny opposition to wind written into the way bone met bone. The saddle's mirage leaned. She leaned back. Enough, not more. Below, the convoy's first vehicle nosed toward the corridor like a question that had already been answered on a different frequency. Time compressed. The notch made the whole day small enough to pick up. "You don't love it," Torres said, reading something in her jaw. "I don't love anything that asks for this much," she said. "That's why it should be you." She didn't answer. The answer would be a story, and stories didn't belong in minutes like these. The figure lifted the lens again. The wind hesitated, as if unwilling to take responsibility for what came next. Lynn drew the slack to the wall and left it there, finger a hinge with nothing to open yet. The rifle weighed nothing and everything. Her heartbeat counted 1, 2, and then forgot to be loud. "Convoy in approach," Guardian called, voice thinner now as if distance were a kind of pressure. Lynn saw the path of a round through 3 kilometers of air, the way gravity would ask for its due, the way wind would try to edit the letter she was about to write. The safest miss would be to the right, into stone. The unacceptable miss would be a story someone else told later about the sniper who chased a number and lost the day. She moved the reticle a width of hair and let it stop on the thing that made the rest of the mountain make sense. "We stay," she said. It wasn't for Torres or the net or the mountain. It was a promise made to a job that never said thank you. "Stay," he echoed. The decision settled in the hide like another body, warm, heavy, immovable. The safe perch behind them blinked out of existence. The exfil route narrowed to a thin pencil line along the spine of the ridge. Night would have to find them later, and pretend to be a friend. "Raven 2, confirm final," the radio said. "Final," Lynn answered. The notch held. The wind leaned. The convoy came. Wind whined along the notch like a thin blade being drawn and resheathed. The saddle's mirage leaned left to right, obedient, readable, while the cut hissed out of the corner of the eye, trying to sell urgency without receipts. Lynn eased the sling until the rifle floated on bone and breath. The reticle lived where the air said it could live, not where she wished it would. "Convoy T-12, Guardian's net said, voice compressed by distance until it sounded thinner than it felt. "Copy 1-2, Torres answered. He pinched a sachet of fruit gel between glove and teeth, squeezed half into his mouth, then tucked the rest under a rock to keep it from freezing. His pencil tapped the slate twice, then wrote nothing. The hide breathed its quiet. Wet nylon, scraped ice, the mineral smell of old stone warmed by human bodies to a temperature just shy of comfort. Lynn's lips had gone dry enough that the skin cracked at the corners. She didn't lick them. The salt would lie about water and make the thirst louder. A burst of static walked across the headset. Not the corridor net, another channel, colliding, a hallway door opening where it shouldn't. "Tell him to quit writing fairy tales," a voice said, clipped, distant, already moving away. Another voice. "If she dials 3 clicks past God." Then the hallway door closed. Silence folded back over the notch. Torres didn't look over. He kept his eyes in glass, jaw still. After a moment, "Support channel's sloppy today." "It's a busy corridor," Lynn said. Her voice had the weight she needed, and not an ounce more. He let out a breath that fogged the rim of his binoculars and wiped it away with the back of his glove. "One of the guys from the Connex texted earlier," he added, not as gossip, more like a weather report. "Said he'd buy you a beer if you pinged God." In the scope, the saddle kept its lean, gentle as unkindness can be. Lynn rolled a stiff spot out of her shoulder and let the reticle resettle itself. The words tried to make a noise in the room. She pictured them as a hum under everything, a generator far away, steady, ignorable, and set her breathing over it like a blanket. "Noise floor," she said. "Say again?" Torres asked. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. She took 4 in through the nose, let 6 out. At the end of the exhale, there was the thin plank of stillness where decisions live, too narrow to stand on if you bring anything extra. She stood there anyway, nothing in her hands. The kestrel spun, hiccuped, spun. Saddle 1.7R. The number went to the card. The card lay under her glove, edges soft from cold and breath. She underlined 107 once and wrote, "Do not chase," in smaller letters beside it, because nerves liked to negotiate when clocks were rude. "Convoy T-10, Net said. "Copy," Torres transmitted, then switched to the ISR snippets. "Orbit re-widened. Feeds broad again. No civilians near the seam." Lynn blinked once, re-wet the world, and eased the bipod cant a degree. The feet bit into rock and told her something about balance that words could not. In the basin, a pale thread of road cut the white like a scar that forgot who gave it. The figure on the far lip didn't show itself. It would. Pattern of life was a gravity with a schedule. Another fragment snuck in from the support channel, closer, then gone. The thing about long shots is they're for stories, not for... The door closed again. Her fingers wanted to clench. She let them want and didn't move them. Heat tried to bloom in her chest, then remembered the cold and sat down. ROE, she said softly, a totem. Calm's brevity, no debate on net. Torres nodded, almost imperceptible. Agreement and a promise to hold the line with her. The gel packet under the rock had hardened at the corners. Torres peeled it up, broke it over his thigh to re-soften, then offered it. She shook her head. He shrugged, finished it, stowed the empty in a zip pocket with a small, deliberate press so it wouldn't crackle later. Raven 2 report, Guardian prompted. My saddle 1.7 L to R, stable, Torres replied. Hide dark, anchor maintained. Lynn thought of the whiteboard and the circle around how 2080s. The laugh had come from the back row, not cruel but careless. She let the memory walk through and out the other side of her head without being offered a chair. The number, in here, had become quiet. It didn't ask to be heroic. It asked to be exact. A ridge gust shouldered the hide, tugged at the antenna, rattled the scrim with a sound like a deck of cards bridged and released. Torres steadied the mast with a flat palm until the wind remembered itself and moved on. The cornice above hummed, then went back to pretending it was permanent. -9, he said, mostly to the mountain. Copy, she said to the job. A small, precise hunger chewed at the base of her throat. She pictured an orange she'd peeled once on a different deployment, cold, sweet, sun in a membrane, and shelved the thought gently. Want was a noise. She kept the room quiet, the figure reassembled from rock as if the mountain had exhaled and made a person by accident. Lens low, shoulders narrow under bulk, elbows tight. He checked left. He checked the road. He settled like a man who trusted his watch. Poel returning, Torres whispered. Pencil, lens, road, left, repeat. The letters came out like a surgeon's. Lynn's breath found the metronome again. 4 in, 6 out. The trigger's wall waited without hurry. The safety lived under her thumb like a decision you plan to keep until you don't. She let the world shrink until the only thing left was the lean of air over the saddle and the pulse that stopped trying to be a drum. Another murmur leaked from the support channel. Amused. Unhelpful. Tell Raven to bring a ladder if she can't reach. The hallway closed a final time. Silence returned like a tide. Torres muttered, unable not to. Wish they'd... Noise floor, Lynn said, not unkind, and the topic ended where it stood. He smiled, small, not for himself. Noise floor, he echoed and wrote it. Neffinenzer in a corner of the slate. A talisman that belonged to both of them now. The saddle's mirage breathed. Left to right. Left to right. The hold lived inside her shoulder joint. A counter lean that didn't need numbers to find itself. She checked the card anyway, because procedure kept hands honest when minds were busy. -7, Guardian counted. Convoy approaching corridor threshold. Copy approach, Torres said. A taste of copper came up in Lynn's mouth where adrenaline had rubbed the edges of everything clean. She swallowed once, slow, and let it go. The rifle felt like furniture in a house built to be quiet. The notch had become a room, and she knew where everything lived in it. The figure's lens tilted again. A small arc that glinted because patience can be bright if you're looking for it. The wind hesitated, then returned to its lean as if unwilling to be blamed for history. Comms check, Torres said, automatic. Good, she said. He wasn't asking about radios. -6, the net said. No civ foot traffic near seam. Corridor remains clear. The laugh replayed one last time, then dissolved into its component sounds. The squeak of a chair, the drag of a boot, the exhale of a man who hadn't walked a ridge like this in years. She filed each sound where it belonged. Not here. She breathed in to 4, out to 6. At the plank of stillness, she made a small room and closed a door in it. The door didn't lock. It didn't need to. She would keep it shut. Anchor 1.7, she said. Anchor 1.7, Torres echoed. The slate closed with a book's last page sound, final without being loud. Below them, a first vehicle rolled into the corridor's mouth and let the road claim it. The notch gathered itself. The mountain listened. The air leaned the way the card said it would. Noise floor, she told herself, and the rest of the world turned down. The wind arrived without theater. No drum roll, just a new edge. The saddle's mirage, steady for an hour, buckled as if a hand had pressed down on the air and twisted. Left to right became left to right plus, then stuttered, then threatened to reverse. Shift, Torres said, already writing. Saddle up 1920 on gusts, cuts rabid. Lynn watched the lean buckle and try to stand again. The reticle wanted to go with it. She let her shoulder keep the line, bone against bone, until muscle learned there wasn't a vote today. Breath found the metronome again. 4 in, 6 out, though the 6 felt like it had splinters. The kestrel's impeller rattled, snagged, spun. Numbers came in staggered like small animals fleeing brush. Temperature down, density up, pressure petty and exacting. She wrote corrections on the card and then crossed a few out with a single flat line. No broad holds. The graphite scar made the page look older. Convoy at corridor threshold, Guardian's net said. The voice had moved an inch closer to urgency, which in this net meant a half degree of warmth, nothing more. Copy threshold, Torres replied. His breath fogged the rim of his binos. He wiped it with the back of a glove already glazed with a film of ice. A gust shouldered the hide. The scrim snapped a question and then remembered itself. Somewhere above, the cornice answered in a low moan like a door tested by a stranger. Lynn adjusted the bipod a hair, felt the feet bite deeper into stone until the rifle stopped listening to the wind's opinion. Hold? Torres asked. Bias right, he said. Safer miss is stone. We don't write to the cut. He drew a box around favor safe from earlier and darkened it until the pencil threatened to snap. She watched the saddle, like you watch someone lie and try to decide if they're lying to you or to themselves. Mirage leaned left to right at 1.9, then snapped to 1.6, then tried 1.8, and held as if embarrassed for a breath. She circled 171 and crossed out 192 with the same flat line. Window smaller. Battery, Torres said, tapping the optic. Half. We're good. Spares within reach, she answered. Words short, useful. Anything extra would invite warmth, and warmth had no place here. The figure on the far lip didn't show. Pattern of life owed them nothing. She scanned the seam, glass smooth, then checked the basin to remind herself it didn't matter. The cut flared a lie at the edge of sight. She did nothing, and the lie went away. Raven 2? Torque check on rings? Guardian asked, mundane on purpose, a way to keeping hands honest. Rings solid, Torres answered, hand brushing the caps like a priest who believed in torque values. The wind took another half step and tried the hide for weaknesses. The antenna guy line thrummed. Torres pinched it until it shut up. Snow crystals lifted and stung Lynn's cheek through the seam in her balaclava. Tiny knives that didn't cut, but insisted. The cold reached her hands and stayed like a guest who'd found his chair. ROE, do not fire on partial PID, Lynn said. Not to fill space, but to set the room's furniture where it wouldn't be tripped over. Copy, Torres breathed. She redrew elevation with the temperature correction, wrote it, then drew a line under it to keep her hand from inventing generosity later. The rifle lay patient, weight honest and square. The reticle floated, not a bird, not a boat, something heavier that could swim through a current without announcing its effort. Convoy 1 entering, Guardian said. 2 following at 30 meters. Corridor still clean. Copy, Torres replied. The wind hesitated between two truths. Lynn felt the tiny wobble of it in the way the mirage bent at the saddle's lip. An extra tremor that would feed around just enough if you let it. She refused to let it. Finger found first pressure and held. The trigger wall was glass. Beyond it, the world changed. Behind it, the world kept arguing. Windows getting mean, Torres said. Windows are honest, she said. We get smaller or we stop pretending. Her pencil scraped. Hold 1.7 LR, only when steady. She boxed. Only po and shaded the box until the word wore armor. The figure reassembled at last as if he'd grown out of the ridge in the exact place the wind wanted him. Hood low. Lens low. He checked the road and left with the same economy as before, but there was a new rigidity in his shoulders that said he had heard the convoy or felt the day reach for its decision. Powell returns, Torres whispered. No civilians. Copy, she said. The card lay under her glove. The glove shook once. Not a tremor, a small revolt. Then took orders. She tightened sling tension by a centimeter until the rifle reminded her it could be lighter than fear if she let it. The wind tried its last trick. A dip into a flirt with a 1.9, then a settle at 1.8. So brief it might not count. The trigger wall heated under her finger, as if the decision could warm its own room. Not yet, she said to no one the net could hear. A crackle of static, then a breath from Guardian. Maintain discipline, Raven. Wilco, Torres said. Lynn felt the taste of metal at the back of her throat fade as her breathing took over again. 4 in, 6 out. The world stopped trying to be about everything and returned to being about air and stone and a human who had made himself an equation. She carried the hold in her shoulder and the refusal to chase in her hand. The wind steadied. 1-7. It stayed as if it had decided to sign its name for once without a flourish. The reticle lived where it would live if nothing stupid happened for the span of a coin falling and hitting ice. Now or not at all, Torres breathed, not pushing, placing the truth where it belonged. Maybe, she said, which in her mouth meant, I hear you and I will own this. The figure shifted to the angle of work, not curiosity. The convoy's lead vehicle came into the seam's imagined arc if the man on the ridge could reach it with whatever he had concealed. The notch where Lynn lay became the narrowest room in the world. She carried the 1-7. Without dialing, shoulder asking a question, the air was finally ready to answer. She blurred the figure to make the mirage red, then sharpened him enough to be sure he was still a person and not a trick. Partial PID is still partial, she said, barely moving her lips. Torres's pencil hovered above the slate, then set down. Copy hold. Copy defer if partial. The wind blinked and kept its promise. She didn't. Not yet. She let the moment go, watched it walk out of the room with its hands in its pockets, and felt the pain of it like a pulled tooth that was going bad anyway. Her finger eased off the wall, and the rifle became furniture again. Window passed, Torres said. No regret, just record. Better than a story, she said. The wind, offended or relieved, slumped back to 1. and then pretended to remember one point. With less conviction, the figure melted into the ridge and left a dark on the lip that could have been his shadow or the mountain's opinion of him. Lynn crossed out 108 to 1.9 again and underlined 17. Until the pencil tore the damp paper a little. She smoothed it flat with a glove and felt the cold come through. Convoy 2 entering, Guardian said. Corridor still clear. Copy, Torres replied, and the slate closed with that small, certain sound of a book that knows where it's going. The Tautim wind had turned a knife, and she had put the edge somewhere it could not cut the wrong thing. Fewer chances now. Better ones. Courage today looked like subtraction. The mountain offered a man-shaped answer and then changed the question mid-sentence. Through glass, the seam breathed. A hood rose, shrank, became rock, became a shoulder, became nothing. Lynn let the reticle drift across the lip and did not chase. The saddle's mirage held at 1 left to right. Honest for the longest minute of the day. Convoy lead passing waypoint Alpha, Guardian's net said. Words clipped, heatless. Second vehicle 30 meters. Corridor remains clean. Copy, Torres replied. He shaved the pencil to a needle, wrote a lead in a small, stubborn hand, and boxed it twice. Frost traced the edge of his glove seam like a hairline crack in glass. A figure parted from the ridge. Not the seam, 20 meters low, a smear of color that read wrong and then insisted on being human. It moved too confidently for a shepherd, too quick for the cold, too careful to be casual. The reticle found a chest and then refused to stay. The wind asked for a lean and she gave it a breath. No more. Possible contact. Low of seam, Torres whispered. Pattern unknown. Hold, Lynn said. The word came out small, heavy, and lived on the hide's cloth like a coin left by the last person who cared. She carried the plot 1.7 in muscle and wrote nothing. The decoy, if that's what he was, did what decoys do. Made the shot seem easy. He crossed a bright patch and let the sun help. He showed a simple geometry of body against stone, an invitation to solve a problem that wasn't the problem they were there to solve. ROE, she said, low. No engagement without full PID, corridor collateral 0. Torres nodded without moving anything that would count as movement. The Kestrel's impeller ticked and stalled. Temperature slid a notch lower. Density altitude paid them back with interest they hadn't asked for. Raven 2 ISR reports intermittent hits near seam. Cannot confirm identity, the net said. Recommend caution. Lynn blinked her world clear and shifted the bipod feet a whisper. The notch's stone gave a small new bite that steadied the rifle and telegraphed calm to the muscles that wanted theater. She felt the trigger's wall with the pad of her finger and let the wall sit there like an unopened door. The decoy stopped at a boulder, as if the boulder had asked him to. He tilted his head toward the basin road, and then back toward the seam where the real work would happen if it happened at all. He was a question wearing a jacket that fit the wrong season. Behavior? Torres breathed. Curiosity, Lynn said. No lens, no posture of work. He shifted again. The mountain's angles tried to gift him a rifle shape and failed. He tucked lower, then turned his back to the basin like people do, when they don't know what the road can do to them. Not trained. A runner, maybe. Or a lookout who preferred stories to reports. The saddle's mirage held at 1.7. For 3 unbroken breaths. The reticle lived on the decoy's chest like a promise she didn't make. The convoy moved below with the slow certainty of carts in an old film. A stutter of motion, then a pose, then motion again. Contact now at seam, Torres said, too soft for panic. His binoculars cut a new line through the air. Lens flash, professional shoulders. That's our grammar. Lynn shifted the reticle off the decoy and rode the saddle's lean to the lip. The figure she knew without knowing reassembled from shadow, a body that ate cover correctly, elbows placed like they had done the math and were tired of it. The lens stayed low, patient. The head moved in two deliberate arcs. Road, left, left, road. Pole building, Torres whispered. He underlined prof cover and just our lens on the slate until the pencil threatened to crack. The decoy did what decoys do at the worst time. He sprinted, uphill and senseless, across the seam's lower edge. The movement opened a bright corridor between him and the trained figure above. The reticle wanted to follow the loudest thing in the frame. Lynn did not let it. Negative PID on the runner, she said, and keyed the mic a breath. Guardian Raven 2, hold, negative PID on lower contact. Upper seam contact remains possible HVT. Copy hold, Guardian answered. Maintain. The runner scrabbled crabwise over a slab, wrong-footed by a patch of ice he didn't respect. He threw an arm out for balance in a way SF never does. He wasn't the threat. He was the weather. The trained figure above him didn't flinch for the runner, which told her everything she needed to know about job versus noise. He adjusted a degree, nose into the wind she could read in the mirage as 1.7. Steady, then backed down, conserving. Convoy lead at corridor midpoint, the net said. Maintain. Torres's breath rasped once against cold nylon and then went quiet. He tapped the slate twice with the pencil and then wrote nothing. The runner squatted, hands on knees, turned once, and lifted his head enough to make a silhouette mistake she could not forgive if it belonged to their target. He panicked at the sound of a distant truck gear on the basin road and ran again, now downhill, now out of the story. The trained figure made one small change, a shift of weight deeper into the seam, a tell that said, work begins when the road arrives. The lens tipped, drank light, refused to glint. Pattern of life, check road, check left, resettle, repeat, wait. ROE, no shot until PID complete, Lynn said, and felt the words anchor the hide to the mountain as if language could be rebar. Copy, Torres said. Hold, negative PID on lower contact. Wind pushed a mild insult and then reconsidered. The saddle's mirage steadied on 1. Long enough for a round trip of thought. The trigger wall warmed under her finger, though physics said metal couldn't warm itself here. The rifle weighed more and less, the particular paradox of a tool about to become an event. She eased off 1 millimeter, human scale, and felt the disappointment arrive and seat itself without asking. The door stayed closed. The decoy stumbled out of the frame, and the frame was better for it. Raven 2, report status, Guardian said. Anchor saddle, Torres replied. Hold, negative PID on lower contact. PID building on seam subject. Wind 1.7 L to R, steady. Copy, the net said. Maintain discipline. The seam figure lowered his head the way men do who are timing clocks they cannot see. He made a small circle with the lens, and then stopped mid-arc, as if something in his ear had said, now, and then changed its mind. The road below delivered a second vehicle into the corridor, then a third. Engines worked against the grade with the sound of patience being expensive. Static littered the headset for a second, and then cleared like a throat trying to be professional. Torres adjusted the antenna angle with 2 fingers as if he were tuning a stubborn instrument. Comms clean, he said, and the statement sounded like hope daring not to be. Lynn breathed in 4, let 6 go. At the far end of the exhale, she found the tiny plank where the hide, the rifle, the wind, and whatever she had left of herself all agreed to be still. She stood there. She did not move. "Hold," she said again, barely a word, a boundary, a vow. The mountain exhaled. The notch breathed with it. The runner became a rumor down slope. The trained figure kept his grammar tidy. The convoy rolled. "-5 to corridor exit," Guardian announced. "No civilian foot traffic near seam." Lynn wrote, "Wait under, hold," and shaded the letters until they felt heavier than numbers. The pencil's point broke and left a silver scratch on damp paper like a promise you renew by hand, because ink refuses. The headset hissed, one long exhale of static, and then pinholed to silence. Torres looked sideways without looking. Frost crept across the mast collar like lace. "Keep it," Lynn said. "Keeping," he answered, bending a wire into a better obedience. She put her cheek to the stock, felt the cold through fabric like truth through story, and let the reticle live where one Savite demanded. She passed over the place where the decoy had made his argument and ignored it on purpose. "Contact, maybe," Torres murmured, meaning contact, not yet. "Maybe is not a trigger," she said. The figure at the seam waited with the patience of work. The convoy kept its appointment with the road. The wind made its small vow. 177. For one more breath, and the door stayed shut. Static came like weather, first a dusting, then a drift, then a wait. The net, once a clean wire through the cold, fuzzed into a long exhale that carried syllables and dropped meaning. The saddle's mirage held at 1.7, left to right as if to mock the chaos elsewhere. "Rav, ksh, 2 rep, ksh, status." Guardian's voice tried and failed to cross the mountain. Torres angled the antenna a degree, glove creaking, breath smoking the mast collar. Ice had grown there in lacework that looked delicate and behaved like armor. He scraped with a laminated card until the card bent, and the ice refused to honor the gesture. "Comms degrading," he said, low. The words fell to the hide floor like tools. Batteries sagging. Lynn kept her cheek to the stock. The reticle laid on the seam where the work would be, where the lane told the truth and asked for a price. "Contingency," she said. No extra syllables. "Copy contingency." He set the slate where she could see his penciled squares, the code they'd rehearsed in a tent that had smelled like heaters and old canvas. Tap once, hold, tap twice, wind shift, flat palm on shoulder, concur, 2 fingers, edge on, pull. If radios went to rumor, hands would finish the sentence. The radio coughed a few words and then choked. Conv, ksh, lead, ksh, midpoint, Torres translated because translation is a kind of faith. He slid the spare handset deeper into the hide pocket and wedged a chemical hand warmer against it. The hand warmer crackled like foil in a winter voice. Above them, the cornice gave a winter moan, timber tested by weight it didn't remember inviting. Spindrift sifted over the lip and dusted the scope hood in sugar that refused to melt. Lynn blinked once to reset the world, then let her breath draw thin until it felt like silk pulled between 2 fingers. The saddle's mirage tried a small cruelty. 1. Then back to House on +7. With the sly apology of a liar who wants to be believed, she wrote nothing. The hold lived in bone now. Numbers were just the minutes explaining themselves. Torres peeled one glove to work the antenna connector bare-fingered. Skin stuck for a heartbeat. Then came away with a soft sound she didn't like. He didn't swear. He tucked the glove back on and flexed. The flex said pain and loyalty in the same line. The net hissed again. ISR, ksh. Orbit, ksh. Seam, ksh. Off task. Call it gone, Torres said. He tapped the slate twice with the pencil point. Wind shift, then pointed with the pencil, subtle, at the saddle where the mirage had picked up a fractional shove. She felt it in the reticles float, the way a boat rider feels a new current before the banks admit it. She gave the shoulder a whisper of counter-lean. The rifle obeyed. The bipod feet dug a breath deeper into stone. She re-squared her hips to the notch's narrow geometry until Bones remembered the angle that made Muscle's opinion irrelevant. The convoy motor sound threaded the air, thin at this distance, a distant zipper you only hear because you know what silence used to be. The first truck moved like a metronome set too slow. The second followed, the gap a promise that had to stay a promise. HVT? Torres asked, glassing the seam. Rock made a man. A hood rose. The lens did its two deliberate arcs, rode, left, rode, then drank light without flashing. The shoulders had the stillness that labor learns. Lynn's breath went in 4, out 6. At the end of the exhale, she found the narrow plank of not breath and stood there with everything that mattered. Static swelled and broke. Raven, ksh, no, ksh, near seam, maint, ksh. Torres tapped once. Hold, not as a veto, as a reminder of law. Lynn's thumb found the safety and stayed. The trigger wall waited, glass and promise. The static came back with a vengeance, a scraped metal sound that lived in the headset and insisted. The handset's battery icon winked down another sliver, then remembered to be a rectangle again. The chemical hand warmer clicked as if counting. Say the word, Torres murmured, and then the net died. Not silence. Silence is a presence. This was absence. The power cut you don't feel until your own noise starts to sound wrong. Lynn didn't lift from the stock. We're dark, she said. Dark, he echoed, and tapped the slate's contingency box with the pencil's dull end. He set the pencil down and freed both hands for signals. They had made a rule before the walk-in. No shot without spotter concurrence. Not by doctrine, but by dignity. In training, it was collapsible. Up here, it wasn't. Up here, the rule had a spine. Wind leaned a fraction harder. Torres tapped twice. Wind shift, and then flattened his hand over her rear shoulder, firm and still. Concur. It was concurrence without words, body to body, the old language that existed before radios borrowed the job. She breathed and let the room shrink to 2 people, 1 rule, and a lane through air with numbers she could draw but didn't have to look at. The reticle rested where the seam would intersect a man who had made the mountain his grammar. The sling took what weight it needed, her jaw unclenched by a tooth's width. A patrol far below, 2 figures with long shapes slung, and a third with nothing but a posture of importance, moved along the basin tail. They were not hers. They were weather, and ignoring weather is a kind of professionalism nobody claps for. Spindrift rattled against the scrim like dry rice in a tin. The optic battery icon blinked a complaint. Torres slid the spare from the pouch and laid it by her cheek so she could grab it without lifting. The battery clicked the plastic like a promise it intended to keep. He tapped once. Hold. And then 2 fingers, edge-on hovered where she could see them without breaking the scope's world. Pultlatin had to come from both of them. They had agreed. They had written it on the whiteboard that smelled of chalk and skepticism. They had carried it up here like water. The figure at the seam rose a little higher, and then pressed down like a man testing a trigger he hoped would behave. He checked the road again, and for a breath, turned his head just enough that the hood angle gave up the truth of a mask under it. Not a shepherd's mask against cold, another kind. Not for weather, for work. Torres's flat palm settled again. Concur, and stayed until her shoulder felt the heat of it through layered fabric, through stone, through the stupid opinions of fear. Then he lifted it off, left that warmth behind, and set 2 fingers where they belonged, waiting for the answer. Her finger took slack to the wall and stopped. The wall was a cliff edge that asked for manners. She gave it the only thing it respected: stillness. Inside that stillness, the urge to talk, to ask, to hear a human voice say the word died without ceremony. If she needed language, she had the hand on her shoulder and the fingers in the edge of her sight. If she needed permission, she had her own breath. The cornice muttered. The antenna quivered and then went still like a spooked animal remembering the herd. The mountain leaned its ear to the notch as if it were tired of not knowing what came next. Torres's 2 fingers stayed edge on. Pull pending. The wind went to Kaktikitachumun 7 and held as if someone had revealed the trick, and it wanted to prove there was no trick at all. Lynn let her exhale end. In the plank that followed, time drilled down to the size of a coin and hung there. She touched the trigger wall with the care of someone opening a door into fire. Torres's fingers gave the smallest nod a human hand can manage without becoming a gesture. They had concurrency. The radio, in that exact second, coughed one last unhelpful syllable and died again. The world waited for a choice. The headset had the dead weight of a stone now. No comfort hum, no hallway voices, just the sound of her own breath loud enough to prove the world was still here. The notch held its narrow room. The mountain leaned in, listening. The saddle's mirage breathed 1 pams. Left to right, a steady lean with the occasional twitch like a muscle remembering pain. Lynn let the reticle float where the air allowed and nowhere else. The rifle rested on bone. Muscle was a guest with no vote. Torres adjusted nothing. He let his binoculars live against the rock, elbows planted, body small, as if politeness mattered to gravity. He showed her an open palm laid flat on her rear shoulder. Concur. Left it there long enough for warmth to cross fabric, then withdrew. 2 fingers edge-on waited where she could see them without leaving the scope's world. Pull would be a whisper of movement. That was all. Down in the basin, the first truck's engine wore the day like a burden it had agreed to. The second truck followed, gap neat, decals bright and absurd against the winter. The third breathed diesel into air too thin to be impressed. The seam figure rebuilt himself from the ridge. Hood low, lens low. The posture of work, not curiosity. He tipped the glass toward the road, toward the left, then paused in a stillness professionals carry like a credential. The decoy from earlier had run himself out of the story. The quiet man remained, which is what quiet men do. Lynn slid the card an inch under her glove. Hold 1.7 LR, only when steady, favor safe. The graphite looked damp and older than it should. She could have memorized it. She kept it there anyway, something for her hand to touch when nerves tried to write their own orders. The wind tested the scrim with a drawer rattle and gave up. The antenna guy line hummed for a second. Torres pinched it, and it remembered to be still. The cold had moved into her fingers and sat there like a polite thief. She let it. Heat belonged to panic. She counted the breath because the breath would be the clock now. In 4. Out 6. At the end of the exhale, a thin plank of knot breadth, too narrow for anything but a decision. She stood there and let the world stop without asking it to. The reticle wanted to chase the mountain's flinch. She kept it on the seam and let the mountain apologize. The bipod feet bit deeper into tiny cups in the rock that might have been made by weather or by the memory of other rifles. She didn't assign meaning. She assigned stability. Torres tapped the slate once with the pencil point. Hold. A reminder that law lives even when radios don't. Then he set the pencil down, both hands free for signals. A taste of metal rose at the back of her throat. She swallowed, slow, and it left. She felt the small nausea that comes when responsibility gets close enough to touch. She did not argue with it. She put it beside the cold and the ache and let them keep each other company. The figure at the seam made a micro-adjustment, elbow deeper, weight lower, like a man easing into a trigger he trusts. The lens hesitated in a way that read as timing. The road moved into whatever arc he had drawn in his head. The saddle's mirage lifted a hair. One titita trying its luck, then settled back to Tsukwan Toitseftu, and held with the decency of a rule acknowledging itself. Lin felt the hold slide from numbers into shoulder joint. She did not dial. She owned it. Torres gave the shortest nod a human neck can make and still be seen. His 2 fingers, edge-on, hovered. Pull loamzium pending? He did not beg. He did not ask. He offered the exact weight of agreement and nothing else. 90 seconds could be a season. The convoy's lead truck entered the seam's imagined geometry, innocent of math. The second truck lagged just enough to give the mountain room to make a mistake and call it weather. Lin pressed the pad of her finger to the trigger until it met the glass wall. Not pressure, proximity. The wall was a cliff edge. Manners mattered. She took slack, left it. The rifle remembered her weight and decided to bear it. Final check, she said. A breath, not a sentence. No civilians. Torres's binoculars never left the seam. He raised his left hand and made a small, negative sweep. Clear, then pressed his palm to her shoulder again. Concur. He held it for a heartbeat and lifted off. The air where his hand had been felt warmer than the rest of the world. She filed that heat as borrowed courage and did not apologize for taking it. The clock she could see, watches, nets, radios, had died. The only clock that mattered now was the body. She drew 4 in, set the rib cage where it had to be, pushed 6 out like a quiet promise, and stood at the plank. Every choice in her life arranged itself into the width of that plank. The wind stayed honest. 1.7, left to right. The cut's old arguments chattered off to the side with no jurisdiction here. The basin shrugged. The seam watched. She put the reticle where a man becomes a problem to himself. She didn't make him a villain. Villains are for stories with room to enjoy themselves. He was work. Work ends. The safety lived under her thumb like a vow she could break with less noise than a thought. She left it where it was for 1 more second, because ceremony teaches the hands to be careful. Then she eased it forward until the sound was just a different shape of silence. Torres's fingers moved a width of hair. Pull, and then stilled, giving her the choice back the way good partners do. Memory tried to lift its head, laughter in a tent, a whiteboard circle around a number that attracted jokes like moths, a training tablet showing a trace just wrong enough to make pride go quiet. She let the images walk through the room and out. The room had no chairs for them. The figure at the seam tilted the lens one last time and settled. He didn't know he had aligned her life to his job. He only knew the road was where he had promised himself it would be. That was enough. Now, Torres didn't say. He breathed near her ear. The breath made no claim. It just existed. Lynn let the exhale slide until there was no air left to argue with, until her chest felt like a still pond with winter sitting on it. The reticle held. The wind held. The hand signal held. The plank of knot breath opened, and she stepped onto it as if it were a floor that would bear weight. She committed, not to glory, not to a record, but to the math the earth had loaned her, and to the people in the trucks who would never know her name. Her finger took the wall. She decided that the next clean 127, this one, not the next, would be the place where decision becomes event. Torres's two fingers made that smallest, not again, the kind of permission that's really a promise. I am with you. The saddle did not blink. The world shrank to a hinge, a breath, and a line through air that existed only because she agreed to. She was already inside the consequence. All that remained was to keep it small and true. The door waited. Raven 2, range. The memory crawled out of the cold and took its place beside her cheek on the stock. 2,980, almost 3 kilometers. Wind 5 to 7, switching. Hold Boreal, send when ready. Send it, the spotter had breathed. Now the headset was a stone. No voices, only breath and the tiny, dry hiss of snow rubbing rock. The saddle held. Fonsevian left to right, steady as a rule that finally remembered to be fair. Torres's palm found her rear shoulder. Concur. And lifted. Two fingers weighted edge-on at the corner of her vision. Pull. Pending. No hurry, no drama, just the grammar of work. She slipped the safety forward until the click became another shape of silence. The trigger wall met the pad of her finger. Not pressure, proximity. On the dope card, the sentence she'd written to herself was already true. Hold 1.7 LR, only when steady, favor, safe. Below, the first truck's engine wore the grade like a pack animal that didn't complain. The second followed, gap neat. Up on the seam, the man reassembled from the ridge the way trained men do. Elbow deeper, lens low, patience tidy. He didn't check the basin for drama. He checked it for timing. Breath in 4. Out 6. The plank of knot breath arrived. Narrow, load-bearing. The reticle lived where the air allowed and nowhere else. The wind held its lean, unshowy, honest. Now. Torres's two fingers made the smallest nod a hand can manage. Pull. She pressed. The rifle broke like a twig in winter. Recoil came back clean, the stock a firm hand that neither flinched nor apologized. The world didn't thunder. It rearranged. Muzzle report shoved the hide's air and was gone, eaten by distance and slope. In the scope, the reticle rose, returned, and found the seam again as if it had always belonged there. Time stretched thin enough to see through. Trace was a rumor at this range, a pale thread teased out of mirage. Maybe almost. Yes. Torres's breath landed near her ear without words. His knuckles tightened on the binocular bridge. The wind, decent for once, kept its signature. 1-7, like a chord sustained. She did not blink. She did not ask. The round wrote its letter through 3 kilometers of weather and math, gravity hugging like a stern parent, spin drift nudging, the mountain's small cruelties arguing in footnotes. She had already chosen which argument to lose. To the right. Stone. To the left. A story she would not allow. The man at the seam finished his stillness and shifted a hair into whatever he had decided would be Kaitani. No. Then impact. Not drama, not gore, just the sudden subtraction of posture. A shape unmade with an economy that felt almost polite. He folded behind the lip the way snow slides when the sun finally remembers it. Torres exhaled the word he hadn't been using. Impact. Then, softer, owning the distance with the caution it deserved. Good effect. Lynn didn't let the relief rush the room. She kept the reticle on the seam and did the thing they had promised each other. Statue 2 minutes. No movement, no second shot, no story. Below, the convoy kept its appointment with the road as if nothing had happened, because for them, nothing had. The notch held their breathing and gave nothing away. The wind considered changing its mind, and then, perhaps out of respect, did not. 30 seconds. Somewhere, a thin sheet of ice shifted and sighed. Spindrift ticked the scope hood. The card under her glove felt heavy enough to be metal. She didn't look at it. 45. The seam stayed quiet. No second figure. No unlucky shepherd wandering into the grammar of consequence. Torres's palm touched her shoulder again. Pressure light, present, then lifted. He didn't need to speak. The hand meant with you, as much as it meant wait. 1 minute. Cold found the bones at the base of her fingers and tried to move in. Let it. Warmth makes hands greedy. She kept them honest. 90 seconds. A small avalanche let go somewhere beyond the cut and fell like a curtain in another theater. The seam did not react. At 2 minutes, she allowed her lungs their first immodest breath. The world did not punish her for it. She set the safety back with the same care she had taken to move it forward. The rifle became furniture again. Torres's voice came back from someplace very close and very far, quiet as a habit. Raven, status. He caught himself. The net was still a corpse. He touched the spare battery where she could reach it, and then left it there. Unnecessary now. Posture unchanged, she said. Not to fill the air, but to put furniture back where it belonged. Her pulse, which had been careful not to be loud, found a regular shape again. The mountain did its old trick of pretending it had always been this way. The seam looked like rock. The basin looked like a road nobody meant harm upon. The trucks looked like stubborn intentions wrapped in white paint and stickers. Exfil later, Torres murmured. Stillness now. She nodded against the comb. Every muscle that wanted to stretch got told, later. The number on the whiteboard did not sing. It didn't even clear its throat. It became a thing that had been true, and now was paperwork. Static fluttered back to life in the headset, moth weak. Raven! Then Ash. She left the handset alone. They were past needing an audience. A detail tried to put glitter on the moment. Record, distance, first of its kind. And she set her boot on its throat, gentle and firm. She hadn't come up here for a plaque. She'd come because the corridor asked for a defender who would take the smaller, truer window and carry its quiet cost. 2 minutes plus, Torres said. Statue complete. Copy, she answered, the word soft as worn webbing. She eased the bolt enough to feel its life, then settled it again. No brass to chase, no echo to admire. Far below, a driver leaned to say something to someone and laughed the kind of laugh that belongs to men who don't know they were in danger and therefore get to keep the laugh clean. The sound never reached the notch. It didn't need to. Torres set his pencil on the slate and wrote only 3 words. Impact. Convoy clear. He boxed them, then put a line through the space where a name might have been. The mountain didn't autograph. Lynn let the last formal breath of the shot go. a tether cut after a safe landing, and felt the absence like a weight redistributing in a ruck. Not lighter, different, earned. The net coughed again, then delivered a voice shaved down by distance. "Raven 2, this is Guardian, report." Torres keyed with a thumb that didn't bother to thaw. "Guardian Raven 2, 1 engagement. Good effect on target. Corridor remains clear. Hide dark." A beat. Paper shuffled on someone else's climate. "Copy Raven 2. Maintain posture, report movement, RTB on order." "Wilco." He clicked off and looked nowhere near her. They stayed small. The notch breathed. The cornice decided to remain architecture. The antenna forgot to complain. The seam kept its secret, which is to say it behaved like a seam again. Lynn slid the card deeper under her glove until she couldn't feel the graphite through the leather. Hold 1.7. Lived in her shoulder now, not on paper. If anyone asked later, she would write the least she could write and let the rest stay here, in a room the mountain had lent them for a few hard minutes. 2 more for pattern, then we ghost, Torres said. She answered with a breath that meant yes. The trucks below grew smaller. The road forgot the drama it almost had to host. The world returned to its regular, difficult work. They stayed with it, quiet as stone. The seam went back to being stone with an almost rude efficiency. The road below kept its appointment with itself. Engines downslope droned a patient bass. Work, not glory. In the notch, time resumed regular size and felt heavier for having been stretched. 2 minutes had already passed, counted in the dry tick of spindrift against the scope hood and the numb ache creeping into Lynn's hands. She set the safety, eased the bolt just enough to feel its life, then settled it again. No brass chase, no second act. Torres breathed, not a word in it. "Raven 2, status," Guardian asked at last, the net sounding like it had been thawed over a candle. "Guardian Raven 2, Torres keyed. 1 engagement, good effect. Corridor, clear, hide dark. Copy, maintain posture until convoy exit. Advise movement, RTB on order." Wilco. He let the handset sleep in the quiet like a pet that had finally stopped pacing. Lynn stayed in glass. Habit, duty, the mirage over the saddle had flattened to a polite 151.6. Left to right, and then got bored. The cut gossiped at the edge of sight. The basin shrugged. She watched each for the length of 1 breath, then another. Nothing insisted. The ache in her forearms arrived properly now, having waited its turn like a decent guest. She moved her wrists 1 at a time, a centimeter, as if the mountain had to approve each motion. The sling gave back an increment of warmth. It wasn't kindness, it was circulation. "Convoy 1 through exit," the net said. The voice wore relief like a badge it didn't want to show. 2 and 3 following, corridor remains clear. "Copy," Torres replied. Silence returned. The notch adjusted around them. The cornice above held its counsel. A small drip had started in the gully to their left, meltwater deciding on a path with the seriousness of a bureaucrat. It tapped the rock with the rhythm of a heartbeat that had gone for a walk and gotten lost. Lynn slid the dope card from under her glove. The graphite had blurred at the corners where breath and weather had found it. Hold 1.7 LR, only when steady, favor safe, wait. Words that had been law 5 minutes ago looked like a diary now, and she didn't keep diaries on mountains. Torres watched her hand without turning his head. His voice was a line held steady. "Your call." She turned the card sideways and tore the top inch where the holds lived. Paper fibers gave with a soft fabric sound. She tore the inch into confetti with the same quiet. The meltwater trickle waited like it had been invited. She worked snow into the scraps until they were pulp and gray, rubbed the pulp against stone until it turned to a smear that looked like the rock had remembered a storm. She rinsed the glove in snow and wiped the smear again. Nothing legible remained. The remainder of the card, blank enough, went back under her glove. "Sanitize," she said. Torres nodded and started the catechism without flourish. Lens cloth over the scope hood to lift the frost ring without leaving a circle. Spare battery pocketed. Brass catcher checked. Empty. Slate wiped with a thumb until the last ghost of pencil became just wet nylon. Antenna lead coiled, routed under a rock seam to erase its memory of having been seen. "Raven 2, confirm status," Guardian prompted. "Convoy 2 and 3 clear," Torres answered. "No movement at seam. Request exfil on your order." A long second then. "Raven, exfil approved. Maintain low signature. Report at phase line Echo." Wilco. The exfil route looked thinner than it had on the way in, as if the mountain, now that it knew their names, had decided to charge more. The safe perch behind them might as well have been a rumor they'd told to get through a bad night. "Silhouette," Lynn said, and they both became smaller. Drag bag zipped. Scrim pulled down with gloved fingers that left no prints where wind wouldn't. Bipod legs folded with a care that made silence into a craft. The rifle slid into the bag like a sword into a sheath in a story that didn't believe in swords or sheaths. They backed out the first meter on elbows. Stone rasped fabric in a speech without nouns. Torres tested the cornice with a probe of weight distributed through a palm and a patience that could have been taught in church. It held. He moved left the length of a breath. She mirrored. No hurry. The world had almost ended and then hadn't. There was no reason to sprint. Below, a patrol of 3 sketched themselves against the basin tail, 2 with long shapes slung, 1 with a posture that said he wanted to be seen. They weren't hers. She lined the ridge between her and them like a lid and resisted the twitch to glass. Curiosity is a movement. Movements make stories. Today didn't need another story. The wind fell away to a tired whisper. Without it, the cold came in with new ideas. Lynn felt the ache in the small muscles across her shoulder blades that held the rifle's memory. She filed the pain under Chaktichvam, Ahern, and kept moving. At the saddle's far lip, Torres paused, set the antenna into its tube, and clicked the lid with a sound the mountain could confuse for ice. He looked back once. She shook her head 0.5 millimeter. No nostalgia. He smiled without his mouth moving. They went on. The phase line echo marker existed only in someone else's map and their shared understanding of a shape on the ground. When they reached the small spinney of winter-burnished shrubs that meant echo, Torres touched his handset. Guardian, Raven 2 at phase line Echo. Copy. Maintain exfil. Report at PL Foxtrot. The voice had warmed a notch, which in that net counted as celebration. Wilco. They used the lee side of a broad fin of rock to drop 30 meters. Snow crust broke under crampons like glass, sick of being delicate. In the gully, the meltwater tapped and tapped and tapped. Lynn thought briefly about the pulp she had pressed into stone and felt the stubborn satisfaction of a clean page. Halfway down the fin, Torres stopped with the patience of a man who had made peace with waiting. He scanned left-right with naked eyes. Lynn did the same. No movement. The seam far above now. Might as well have been a rumor told in another country. She found she did not want to look back. The urge to admire is a kind of noise. They crossed a patch of wind-scoured ice that required the kind of balance you negotiate with ankles, not courage. When they reached rock again, Lynn let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding, and felt silly about the cliché of it. Then forgave herself because oxygen is cliché and everyone still needs it. PL Foxtrot, Torres said, tapping the handset. Raven 2. Copy Foxtrot, Guardian replied. A paper shuffle, a pen somewhere, some other world. RTB, debrief on arrival. Wilco. The slope gentled, and they allowed themselves the luxury of 3 steps without checking the sky. It felt like sin. It felt like vacation. It felt like winter pretending to be spring for one breath's length. Back near the fob's wire, the world smelled of hot metal and rope again. The tense canvas thumped in a wind that had not earned the right to sound important. Lynn set the drag bag down in the armory bay with the quiet of a placed stone. Torres scrubbed his hands with snow until the skin burned, then shook them out, flexed, and made a face at the raw stripe a connector had left. He didn't complain. He set the slate on the bench and with a pencil he had sharpened too many times, wrote, Impact. Convoy clear. No signature. Briscoe stepped in with the map already in his hand. His eyes did the work of checking them for obvious damage. Report, he said, though the net had already told him what words could tell. Executed 1, Torres said. Good effect. Corridor remained clear. We sanitized and X-filed dark. No secondaries, no pursuit. Briscoe looked at Lynn like a man who had questions he wouldn't ask in public. You okay, Staff Sergeant? She nodded once. The motion felt like a signed form. Yes, sir. He almost smiled. It stopped short. Debrief in 30. Eat something. Roger. He left. The tent went back to canvas noises. Lynn unzipped the drag bag, folded the rifle's legs, wiped an imaginary line off the hood that was probably just a scratch from a life before today. She slid the remainder of the card out, the blank portion, turned it over, and found it blessedly useless. Good. Torres glanced at her hands. You'll keep the inch? He asked, knowing the answer. She slid the blank into her pocket. Nothing to keep. He nodded. Quiet metal, he said, and it didn't sound like a compliment so much as a category. Outside, a forklift beeped in civil time. Someone laughed like the day had been perfectly normal, because for them it had been. The wind nosed the tent and changed its mind. The mountain, somewhere past the wire, past the polite perimeter of a map, forgot them the way mountains must. Lynn sat on the bench, felt the webbing imprint her legs through the uniform, and let the last of the shot leave her chest by inches. Not lighter. Different. Earned. She reached for a protein bar, broke it in half, handed the larger piece to Torres. He shook his head. She insisted with a look. He took it. They ate the way soldiers do after a decision has been made and filed. The dope card, or what used to be one, stayed where it belonged, nowhere anyone could read. The debrief room had the politeness of metal chairs and bad coffee. A space heater clicked like a metronome that had forgotten the song. Maps overlapped along a corkboard, thumbtacks arranged as if geometry could domesticate weather. Lynn sat where the wall watched her but didn't lean, bones stacked the way the rifle had taught them. Briscoe stood with his forearms on the table's edge, sleeves pushed, jaw quiet. S2 perched beside him, a pen already making tidy fences around boxes that didn't yet have words. Torres took the chair at her 10 o'clock, shoulders easy, slate face down on his knee. The room smelled faintly of solvent and canvas warmed more than it liked. Raven 2, Briscoe said, not unkind. Walk it. She kept the clock out of her voice. Karak Plateau. Overwatch from notch position. Wind characterized in 3 tiers. Saddle lane anchored. ISR seam window received at -35, 5-minute zoom granted. upended, built on lens behavior, posture, and professional cover use. No civilian signatures adjacent. At convoy midpoint, with wind steady at 1.7 left to right. Spotter concurrence achieved. One engagement, good effect. Hide remained dark. Exfil on order. S2's pen clicked once and then remembered to be polite. Range estimation? Laser read 2.98 kilometers. Terrain matched the profile. We carried wind by hold, not dial. A nod that pretended to be neutral. Ballistic calculator readout attached? Not attached, Lynn said. We logged conditions on slate. Calculator remained a cross-check, not authority. S2's eyebrow made a small, curious triangle. For the record. For the report, she said. Record can sit somewhere else. Briscoe slid a form toward her. Boxes pre-labeled the way bureaucracy says it will make memory safe. Distance field, he said. Enter your best, Staff Sergeant. She wrote 2,980 mouthers, laser, and then a smaller word beneath it, est. That word was a gate. It said, true enough for work, and not for trophies. S2 tapped the table near the number. You understand this could be a shot, Lynn said, level. That prevented an event. The rest is rumor until the Earth signs it, and it doesn't sign. Torres exhaled through his nose, the shape of a smile he didn't attend to. The heater clicked. Someone outside dragged a crate and the concrete took the noise calmly. S2 tried a different angle, polite. There will be interest. There's a convoy that got through, Lynn said. They can be interested in that. Briscoe coughed a small agreement. OPSEC, keep it tight. S2, nudged by duty more than hunger, asked. Witness corroboration, ISR footprint? ISR lost orbit before fire, regained after, Torres said. We'll attach timestamps for the seam zoom and corridor status. No imagery of the moment. The mountain declined to autograph. Briscoe's mouth tugged. Not a smile, a detente. Fine, fine. Add your timings. He pointed at Lynn's empty dope card. Blank now, corners damp from snow. Anything else? She slid the card a centimeter so the blankness could be seen and be understood. No. S2's pen hovered. Ancillary notes? Personal log? Environmental? Destroyed, Lynn said. Sanitized at Hyde. All that's left is what belongs here. She tapped the form just once, a rap at the door. Two shooters leaned in with faces arranged for curiosity that wanted to be goodwill. Hey, Raven, the taller one said. Is it true you… Briscoe didn't look up. Out. The door shut on a whisper that sounded like a rumor putting on its boots. S2, already on the next box, said, Any recommendation for TTP changes? Anchor to fewer lanes sooner, Lynn said. Refuse broad holds. ISR seam request earlier, even if corridor coverage complains. Publish contingency concurrence SOP, hand signals, so people stop inventing when batteries quit. S2 wrote, efficient. And for the pen tipped toward the number again. Distance? Don't brief the number, Lynn said. Brief the lane and the law. Numbers draw laughter and tourists. Torres finally moved the slate from knee to table and flipped it. The pencil blocks from the ridge had been wiped to faint ghosts. Only 3 words remained in the corner, rewritten darker. Impact. Convoy clear. He turned the slate so S2 could see, then turned it back as if the words belonged to the room for a second, and to them again after. Briscoe took the report from Lynn, read what mattered, and initialed without flourish. Debrief closed, he said. Good work. The last 2 words were quiet enough to avoid becoming decor. S2 gathered the forms like a man not yet convinced he had the day's story. There will be inquiries. he said, more to the air than to them. Elsewhere. We'll answer what belongs to the mission, Lynn said, and leave what belongs to the mountain where we found it. He nodded because the sentence had the shape of an order and the weather of truth. He left with the papers, his footsteps making a modest argument with the floor. Briscoe lingered. You okay, Staff Sergeant? She found the honest part of okay and set it on the table. I am within spec, sir. Good. He scratched at the day-old stubble on his throat like a man thinking with his hand. There'll be chatter. Let it pass. He tapped the form's distance line once with a knuckle, then looked up. We don't recruit myths. Roger. He left them to the heater and the coffee and the chairs that would always be a little wrong for backs. Torres leaned back until the chair complained. He dug into a pocket and came up with a small washer of dull steel, drilled long ago, edges softened by use. He turned it once between thumb and forefinger, then set it on the table, not sliding it, placing it centered between them. What's that? Lynn asked. He shrugged. Piece off a generator panel from the old OP at Harkness. Keeps my gloves honest when I have to turn tiny screws. He tapped the washer, then the slate's 3 words. Thought you might want to borrow the weight. She looked at the ring. Not coin, not metal, just mass. A circle with nothing in it. Inside the circle, the tabletop's scarred laminate showed through. She set a finger in the hole and felt the edge. Cold, real, a thing for pockets that didn't tell stories to strangers. Borrowed, she said. I'll return it when it's not doing work. He made that not smile again, the one that belonged to people who don't need to be seen to believe they exist. Noise floor, he said, almost a toast. Then he stood, stretched the way men stretch around old injuries, and left to see about batteries and weather and the kinds of chores that keep legend from owning the shop. Alone, Lynn reread her own hand on the form. Letters even, no flourishes. 2980, laser est. Under her narrative. She had written fewer words than S2 would have preferred and more than she wanted. PID confirmed by behavior and seam ISR window. Wind characterized, spotter concurrence, 1 round, good effect. She underlined nothing. She did not write about breath or planks or the way time can hang from a hook for the span of a heartbeat. She stood to leave and saw a smear on the cuff of her glove where pulp from the destroyed card had dried to a gray ghost. She rubbed it clean against the table's underside, a place that did not require appearances, then checked the glove seam for fray and pressed it flat with a nail. Outside, the corridor the map had once pretended into existence was a place trucks had actually been. The mountain did what mountains do when humans stop narrating them. It remembered only itself. She stepped into air that didn't ask questions and let it take whatever of the story belonged to it. They had laughed at the number. She had left them the number. The rest stayed where it should. In the hinge of a trigger she hadn't abused, in a rule she hadn't bent, in a lane of air that had been honest for long enough to be used. The earth kept its secrets. She kept hers. The armory at night sounded like a machine holding its breath. Fluorescence hummed a note just shy of annoyance. Somewhere a heater coughed and decided to behave. Lynn set the drag bag on the bench and unzipped slow, fabric teeth whispering secrets to no one. She broke the rifle down into the small, familiar truths that had outlasted the day. Bolt out, lugs checked, lint coaxed off with a brush she'd cut short years ago to make it meaner. The solvent smell promised clean more than it delivered. She took what it would give. Cotton patches lifted a gray she could pretend was only dust. She didn't pretend. She kept wiping. Outside the tent, someone laughed too loud and then remembered the hour. The laugh shrank and walked away. Lynn rotated the optic cap with the pad of a thumb, feeling for grit that wasn't there, then stepped through the motions anyway. Maintenance was a prayer, not to be heard, only to be done. Torres came in, a rectangle of colder air folding itself into the warm. He held a plastic tub of batteries like a baker with something that would never be sweet. A raw stripe across his knuckles had woken purple. He set the tub down and eased onto the bench at an angle that kept the ache from taking a vote. QRF had a false start, he said. Somewhere down wire, gate sensor hiccup. Half the tent sat up, then lay down and pretended they hadn't. Good, she said, meaning nothing to fix tonight. She tugged the sling free and ran her fingers along webbing, pausing where a stitch had thought about quitting. The needle kit lived in a side pocket. 3 loops and a knot later, the stitch had been told its future. The chatter from the Conex Bay filtered in as a rumor, consonants and shapes without words. Her name wasn't in it. Her number was. She let the number float in the room like steam, then watched it disappear. On the workbench, Torres laid the small steel washer between them, as if it were a compass, with only one direction. Stay steady. The metal had the weight of something that had done humble work too long to forget how. Still want it? He asked. She rolled it with a finger. The circle made no claims. When she lifted it, it left a cold coin of absence on the bench that felt honest. Borrowed, she said. He nodded. No ceremony. Let me show you something ugly. He opened his slate, not the field one, a shop slate, where a camera roll should have lived and didn't. He'd cleared it already. He turned the device so she could see the emptiness and be relieved the way some people are by a blank page. Nothing to leak. My handset too, she said. She had wiped it after debrief, shoulders tight waiting for the "Are you sure?" prompt. No prompt, only the quiet that follows a decision. He pulled a protein bar from a pocket, snapped it in half without looking, handed her a piece. The wrapper made a dry, guilty sound. He folded it small and tucked it under the battery tub so it wouldn't travel. She ate, each bite becoming fuel instead of taste. The silence between them had content. Today's work put away, tomorrow's not yet named. The heater clicked a new tempo. Someone outside dragged a crate like dragging a bad mood across concrete. When she finished, Lynn wiped the bolt lugs again, more for the gesture than the grit, and reassembled the bolt with a turn that stopped at the place her hands had learned to trust. The rifle came back together like a sentence that didn't need adjectives. Her phone, a rectangle of compromise, lit with a notification banner that offered a news alert about record shots elsewhere in the world. She thumbed it dark without reading. Another banner, a text from a number she didn't have saved. Is it true? No name, just appetite. She powered the phone off and took out the battery to make the silence clean. Noise floor, Torres said, not a question. Noise floor, she agreed, and put the dead phone in the dead phone pocket, the one whose zipper squeaked if opened in the field. She left it there to practice not tending it. The washer spun once more on the bench, then she pressed it flat with her palm. The hole in the middle felt like permission to place nothing there. She slipped it into the small pocket at her left thigh, the one that had never found a perfect purpose, and patted it once so it would learn its home. Outside, another false alarm coughed the fob awake for 5 seconds. A siren yipped once and thought better of it. Boots thumped. Then all the sounds remembered the hour again. Torres rotated a spare optic battery in his fingers, watching the logo spin. You sleep? He asked. Enough, she said. It would be a ration, not a feast. You? I'll go horizontal until the net warms. Might do the stupid scroll. He raised his eyebrows at himself. Or not. Not, she said, a smile that only reached one half of her face. Let the world earn our attention. He grunted assent. You know S2 wants us in for a friendly follow-up tomorrow. He left that word on the door of friendly like a tip. We'll bring the report, she said, wiping down the stock until the cloth stopped lying about being dirty. Not the story. He stood, joints protesting with small private sounds, and gathered the battery tub. At the flap, he paused, glanced back. You kept the washer. I kept a thing that does work, she said. He nodded. Same language, then. He left, the night folding shut behind him. Lynn rechecked the torque on the rings with a tool that had 3 settings and only needed 1. The click was modest. She logged it on a yellow card that didn't leave the armory. The handwriting was even, neither proud nor tired. When the rifle was ready to be ignored, she zipped the drag bag and leaned it where the bench met the wall. The corner of the bag had a scuff from a deployment nobody bothered to name anymore. She pressed the scuff with a thumb, then took her hand away. Not everything used needs to look new. It only has to be clean. In the bunk tent, canvas snapped once, adjusting to a wind that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a problem. Lynn slid into the narrow cot, the sleeping mat's stiff grammar reminding her hips what mattered. She lay on her back and watched the dark learn her outline. The washer rested against her thigh like a small planet, finding orbit. Breath in 4, out 6. At the end of the exhale, she found the plank that the day had taught her to trust and used it for something less expensive. Quiet. Someone murmured from another row, the loose talk of a dream. The heater clicked. The tent forgot the mountain and remembered sleep. Lynn's hands did the last check they always did. Ring finger flex for trigger discipline, thumb twitch for safety memory, shoulder roll for sling friendliness. The body likes exits. Give it one and it stops pounding on the door. She closed her eyes. The seam did not arrive behind them. The number did not perform. The earth kept its secrets. She let it keep them. The washer warmed to her skin by degrees. Dawn came the color of old aluminum. The wind laid a flat hand on the canvas and left. Coffee steamed in paper cups that softened too fast. The briefing tent collected boots, breath, and a low-grade hum that meant people wanted a story and would pretend otherwise. Lynn stood at the whiteboard with the cap in her palm and a rectangle of silence around her. Someone had scrawled 2080 it's in the corner during the night, a joke that had slept badly. She didn't erase it. She drew a small box over the number and shaded the box until the ink became a square of nothing. On the clean space, she wrote in block letters, Anchor the lane, PID or nothing. Under it, wind is a law, not a wish. She underlined nothing. The board didn't need decoration. Torres arrived with the day on his shoulders and a cardboard tray of cups. He handed her one without comment. His knuckles were a healing map. In her thigh pocket, the steel washer pressed a small circle against her skin. Weight enough, not a burden. S2's captain slid in, black binder hugged to ribs, smile shaped to pass as neutral. A civilian PAO rep trailed him, badge on a lanyard, camera phone in a pocket that couldn't help looking like a holster. Staff Sergeant Nguyen, the captain said. Quick follow-up, minor detail pass. Then PAO here wants to... No photos, Lynn said, even. No quotes for outside the wire. The PAO rep lifted a placating hand. Of course. Internal recognition only. Best practices piece. Human interest. Interest belongs to the corridor, she said. She sipped and let heat correct her mouth back to feeling. We'll give you the TTPs. Leave the rest alone. S2 had the grace to look at the board. He read the 3 lines like a pen practicing not being a sword. You're becoming famous for restraint, Staff Sergeant. I'd prefer the corridor become famous for routine, she said. Torres coughed something that might have been a laugh if it had permission. The PAO rep gestured to the shaded square over the sound 280. Is that a box? Lynn said. For things that don't help. Briscoe stepped into the tent with frost on his eyebrows, and the map already open to the new problem. The room shifted around him like metal finding true. Humanitarian resupply diverted from the Eastern Pass, he said. We own the Western Corridor today. Winds ugly by noon. Raven? Raven will overwatch, Lynn said. She felt the washer settle, orbit aligned. Same ROE, anchor the lane, PID or nothing. Briscoe marked the ridge with a knuckle. Seems different, less forgiving. ISR window tight. You sure about the notch? We'll find the geometry that tells the truth, she said, and we'll pay for it in advance. He liked the sentence and hid it. Good. Stack with Hawk on comms. If radio's ice, you're back to hand signals. Torres flicked a glance at her, then nodded at the captain. We'll publish the contingency set for the battalion. Tap codes, palm concur, 2-finger pull. People stop inventing when the noise starts. The PAO rep tried again, careful. Staff Sergeant, before you head out, could you clarify the exact distance yesterday? There's talk. It would help to... Lynn set her cup down. The cardboard dimple left a wet circle on the folding table. She placed the cap beside it, a second circle dry. We stopped an event, she said. The Earth doesn't certify applause. The rep's smile softened, then folded itself away. Understood. S2, because duty demands nudging even when it's unwelcome, said, the number will get out anyway. Then it can walk without me, Lynn said. It knows the route. A lance corporal, new, shoulders tense with unused energy, hovered near the edge of the group, eyes skimming between the board and her face. The kind of look that asks to learn and fears being seen asking. Lynn crooked 2 fingers, and the Marine stepped forward like a secret reporting for duty. You'll sit on our comms, she said. You'll keep count when count matters. You'll say little. If you must say something, say hold or wend. Nothing else. Yes, Staff Sergeant. What's your breath cadence? She asked. He blinked. Ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. Count it. He swallowed, counted silently. 4 in, 6 out. Good. When the room shrinks, live there. Everything else is weather. She tapped the words on the board. You don't anchor the number. You anchor the lane. Color rose in his face with something that wasn't embarrassment. Copy. Briscoe rolled the map shut with a flat palm. Step off in 90. Get your glass and bones ready. Chairs rasped. The tent exhaled bodies into air that had learned the morning. As the group dispersed, the taller shooter from the Konex, coffee-lid comedian, paused in the opening. He jerked his chin at the board. Solid lines, he said. It almost counted as apology. It didn't need to. Bring your own, Lynn said, not unkind, and turned back to her kit. Outside, the day wore a sky too thin to support drama. In the armory, she checked torque by muscle memory, the click almost shy. Sling webbing lay obedient, stitches quiet. The bolt hugged its tolerances like a secret. She touched the washer through fabric, a small round honesty to measure herself against. Torres set a spare battery in the drag bag's side pocket, then a second in a place his hand could find blind. He met her eye. Same hill, different weather. Same law, she said. At the doorway, S2 caught up, binder underarm. For what it's worth, he said, keeping his voice for the small room only. I prefer the corridor famous for routine, too. Then write that, she said. He nodded once. Walk safe. They stepped into air that carried their breath away without comment. The mountain watched them without interest. That indifference had always been a mercy. At the gate, a forklift beeped in civil time, and a truck slouched past with canvas sides cinched and the smell of burlap and diesel. Human work, nothing theatrical. A driver glanced over, took in uniforms, gear, readiness, then returned to the road with the humble gravity of someone who doesn't want to make a story today. Good. Lynn adjusted the drag bag on her shoulder. The washer pressed warm now. The lanyard-badged rep stood off to the side, phone pointed at his boots. He lifted a hand. Not a wave. An acknowledgement he wouldn't turn into pixels. She dipped her chin. That was enough. Raven moving, Torres said into a net that behaved for now. Copy, Briscoe answered. Report at phase line Able. They walked. The wind shifted, reconsidered, and settled into something that would become math. Lynn let the day write its demands across her bones and found room for them. She thought of the shaded square over Datun, 2980, and felt the small satisfaction of a clean shape. At the ridge's first rise, she paused and looked once back at the phobie. The tent had already resumed being a tent. The board waited for other hands to make their claims. She turned and faced the hill that wasn't yet theirs. Anchor the lane, she said, mostly to the ground. PID or nothing, Torres answered. They climbed into a sky that couldn't be bothered to applaud. It would do. She counted 4 in, 6 out, and let the exhale open its old narrow room. The mountain didn't care. It had never cared. That was the point. She went to work.